I'm Allison Cruz here in Amelia County in Jetersville, and I'm for the soil.
It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the mid-July episode of For the Soil Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and coming up on today's podcast, we'll be talking about the Chesapeake Bay, specifically how soil health impacts the Chesapeake Bay. We have a very special guest for you. But before we get to the podcast, I do want to remind everyone of the website forthesoil.org. That is the digit 4, thesoil.org. And we've got an area that we're focused on right now, and it's called the blog. A lot of very interesting information that you'll find there at the blog, including recent entries on National Dairy Month, how we celebrate dairy farmers, and ways that dairy farmers contribute to our health and resilience. There's also a blog entry on the different ways that food lovers can help build soil health in your own backyard vegetable garden, and also building soil health with a growth mindset. Just go to the website at forthesoil.org, and in the upper right menu bar there, you'll see the area that is entitled Blog. Just click on that and you'll see a lot of great information on soil health. Once again, the digit 4, thesoil.org, and then click on Blog. Oh, let's now get to today's podcast. Welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and Eric Bendfeldt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Community Viability. We are at a field day today in the Shenandoah Valley, and we have a very special guest joining us.
Yes, Jeff, we're pleased to have Matt Kowalski with us from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And I know in my career with Extension, we've worked with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Jeff and I were just talking about some of the Farmer to the Bay trips that we went on, some trips to Tangier Island. So it's always been good.
It's been a few years ago, hasn't it?
It has, and we're glad to partner with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and have Matt join us today.
Yeah, I remember that trip. The Bay Foundation was such a great host. They took us out into the bay. We went crab, what do you call it, crab fishing?
Set your crab pots.
Checking crab pots, and I saw my first eagle on that trip. It was a very memorable trip. And Matt, tell us about for people who have never heard of the Bay Foundation, what's it all about?
Sure. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation is the largest single nonprofit organization solely dedicated to saving the Chesapeake Bay. So we've got offices. The organization began in Annapolis, Maryland, and now we've got offices in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. The Philip Merrill Center is a LEED certified building up there in Annapolis, and we try to make our buildings as sustainable as possible. There's a wonderful newer building, the Brock Environmental Center. It was actually a certified living building that met both the LEED Platinum certification, and then one step above and beyond that, it actually creates more energy than it uses and harvests rainwater. So all the water that's used on site comes from the rain as well. So it's pretty neat.
We have a lot of subscribers to this podcast from all over the United States, and some might not be familiar with the bay itself and the size of the bay and how many rivers and how many states are in the watershed. Give us some of that geography.
Great. It's pretty extensive. It's very interesting. Here we are in the Shenandoah Valley, and sometimes people here even don't realize they're part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But it includes 6 states and the District of Columbia. So it goes all the way up into New York. It includes New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, obviously, and DC. But the bay itself is actually the largest estuary that we have here in North America as well. So.
My time in the Navy, I spent many a day on the Chesapeake Bay, sailing from Norfolk to Yorktown to Bloodsworth Island to Annapolis, and it's quite a body of water. Eric?
And Matt, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is also part of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Can you talk about the connection between soil health and the mission around the Chesapeake Bay?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has the mission of saving the bay. You guys have probably seen the bumper sticker with the seagull on it. But to save the bay, one of the things we've got to do is keep water clean. That doesn't just mean the water that's in contact with the bay. I mentioned how large the watershed is. So in order to clean the bay, what we've got to do is create clean local waterways. In order to get clean local waterways, one of the best ways that we can do that is to look farm by farm and field by field. With better soil health, we've got better nutrient cycling on site. We've got the ability of the fields and the soil to absorb more rain when we get precipitation. That alone can result in less stormwater runoff, less floodwaters, less overland flow, carrying potential pollutants down to our streams, down to our local streams, and eventually all the way to the bay. So we love soil health and talking about soil health because it's a wonderful way to keep both our local waterways and the Chesapeake Bay clean.
Give us a specific idea of one of the projects here in the western half of Virginia, say from Blacksburg through Roanoke and the Shenandoah Valley up to Winchester. What are you doing in that area that benefits water quality in the bay?
So a lot of what Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been doing for the past decade or so, we've been really focused on trying to help grazing operations, try to do more both to make their operations more productive, but to be able to farm in a way that's good for water quality. So one of the things that we promote, I'm sure you've seen and heard of riparian forested buffers, so reforesting those buffers, but related to soil health and really one of the things that helps a farmer's bottom line, we've been doing a lot for the promotion of rotational grazing. So when we rotationally graze, you've got typically more of the field or more of the farm at any given point resting, and by that we mean not being actively grazed, than the individual paddocks or fields where you might have livestock actively grazing. It's a wonderful way to promote soil health, but it lessens the impact of the livestock at any given point. The forage grows more robustly. It puts on a deeper root system. So that when we get precipitation events, those plants are able to harvest, to capture the rain and the moisture that they're not absorbing. The healthier soils, because there's more carbon in those soils, also absorbs more of that pollution. So not exclusively, we also promote wonderful practices like cover cropping, no-till, if we've got row cropping or agronomic operations. But lately, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been trying to put a little bit more emphasis on helping out those grazing operations and then trying to help fill in the gaps that are left by some of our traditional funding programs like the Soil and Water Conservation Programs or NRCS through their EQIP programs. Every farm's a little bit different, so if there's an opportunity for CBF to step in and help fill the gaps that are left programmatically or funding-wise to help make those things happen, that's what we're here for.
One of the core principles is the idea of energizing with diversity of crops, livestock, as well as enterprises. In promoting grazing, can you talk about the importance of integrating livestock into an operation?
Yeah, probably the easiest way to say it is relatively simple, and it is that by incorporating livestock into a system, there are things that happen related to soil health and the microbes below the ground that just don't happen if you don't have a warm-blooded animal out there eating the forage and peeing and pooping. So the contribution that they make to the soil health and to the diversity, you mentioned diversity, often we think of that as occurring above ground in the things that we plant or the things that we grow, maybe the animals that we harvest. But that diversity extends below ground as well. So if we can include those warm-blooded grazers doing what they do into a system, it creates that diversity below ground as well and just makes soil health take an amazing added jump.
Let's now shift gears completely. Talk about, today we're on a farm. We're on a field day at the Mike and Susan Phillips farm in Mosee, Virginia. Let's now go to Annapolis, Maryland. Residential backyard. homeowner on a Saturday morning has his fertilizer spreader. He's got 6 bags of fertilizer ready to roll. What does he need to know concerning soil health and water quality?
Absolutely. And as a little tag here, when I'm giving presentations, I like to ask groups sometimes what they think the largest single crop. And it's a trick question, because the way I ask it is I say, what's the largest crop that's grown in the Chesapeake Bay watershed? And it's my trick question, because the answer is there's more acreage maintained as cool season lawns than any other acreage in any single other crop type. So your question's a great one, because it gets at the point that with that much acreage managed as cool season lawns by homeowners, etc., there's a lot of potential there to affect water quality. So to get back to your example, a few different things that I would tell any homeowner thinking about whether or not they're going to put that fertilizer out, and what they're doing with their lawn, what they're using it for, and how they can maintain it. So we'll go to the fertilizer first, and I will say that you should never put down fertilizer without doing a soil test first. If fertilizer is a nutrient, and it's going to help any particular organism grow. We all need nutrients. As humans, we take it in through our diet. Plants take it in through the roots. But if the plant is going to grow perfectly well with the nutrients that already exist in the soil, the only thing you're doing by putting down more is wasting your money, and potentially, I shouldn't say the only thing, you're definitely going to be wasting money. You could also potentially be contributing to runoff of those additional nutrients. So nitrogen and phosphorus, in addition to sediment, are our 3 biggest pollutants to the Chesapeake Bay. So if we can get people to use their fertilizer appropriately, only as needed, that goes a long way toward keeping it in place and not having that nitrogen and that phosphorus run off into our waterways.
But I really, really, really want the greenest lawn in the neighborhood. Is there a way I can do that and be environmentally sensitive?
Sure, you can look into different species of grass that you might want to grow, or alternatives to grass. You can have a very green, beautiful, lush lawn that might be planted in something like Dutch clover, as an example. So using a different species, or maybe some different species of grass that have different demands on nutrient. Another thing that I'll say is you can have a real lush, healthy lawn by maybe letting it grow a little bit taller. And we tell people that with livestock operations as well. We say take the animals off that field when it gets down to 4 inches, 3 at the bare minimum. The reason why we say that is more grass growing up top grows more roots down below. So if you've got more plant on the top side and you're willing to set the height of your lawnmower a little bit higher, maybe not cut it quite as often would be another option as well. Let those roots grow deep and green and healthy, and then you can have that good healthy lawn without the added use of more fertilizers to try to keep it alive. Let the plant do what it's made to do. Grasses are fantastic organisms, and they can grow roots 6-12 feet deep and scavenge all those nutrients and that moisture from pretty far down the soil profile if we give them the opportunity to grow the way they were intended to.
Eric, just a couple of minutes remaining in this episode of For the Soil, a conversation. Any final question for our guest?
I know, Matt, this might throw you off, but I know we had visited a little bit at the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council conference a few months ago. Do you have a book or an author or farmer that you might identify as a resource for people listening to the podcast?
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to think. There's so many different good ones out, and I'm not good with names, so I'm sure I'm going to blank out on you. I don't know if I can give you a good one right now. I picked up a copy of Defending Beef, but I haven't read it yet. So hard for me to give an endorsement when I haven't had a chance to leaf through it.
She has been a guest of this podcast, and that should be a very interesting book. Resources available through the Bay Foundation. What can you tell us about the website and so forth?
Depending on what it is you're interested in, we've got a website that talks about education, different educational opportunities. Chesapeake Bay Foundation also works with farmers and landowners. We do education related to legislation. I'm trying to think, how can I touch on a great resource that I've got to put in a plug for is the Mountains to Bay Grazing Alliance. So it's a regional association of partners that are interested in promoting rotational grazing, both for the benefit of water quality and for the benefit of the farmer. So help them get more out of their operation and help them do it in a way that creates clean water for us.
And the web address for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation?
cbf.org.
Eric and Matt, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Matt, and really appreciate the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's collaboration with Extension, the universities, and the Soil Health Coalition, and for being a guest on this podcast.
Absolutely. I'm glad you found me and pulled me aside.
And it was a pleasure to have Matt Kowalski with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation as a guest of the podcast today. Now we hear from Dr. Rory McGuire at Virginia Tech with a tip on keeping soil healthy.
Yes, minimize soil disturbance is one of the first things that we worked out when we were looking at conserving soils. After the Dust Bowl was caused by drought, but also caused by the moldboard plow disturbing and destroying soil structure. So when you disturb the soil, you destroy soil structure, and you also burn off organic matter. So minimizing soil disturbance by practices such as no-till, you help build soil structure. When you have good soil structure, water drains properly. You don't have problems with compaction. If you have compactions, your roots can't grow through the soil. Minimizing soil disturbance by not moldboard plowing, doing conservation till or no-till is extremely important.
Dr. Rory McGuire at Virginia Tech. And once again, you'll find more tips for keeping your soil healthy at our website, forthesoil.org. For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you should have a specific question about soil health, contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of Mr. Ruiz and the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.